Hey, friends and fiends of the pod, this is your host, Nate Wyckoff, inviting you to listen to this rebroadcast of a classic episode while we work hard to get brand new episodes out your way directly into your earballs and your eyeballs. Remember, you can listen to classic episodes at cultandclassicfilms.com as well as watch us at youtube.com/@cultandclassicfilms. You can also go to cultandclassicfilms.com and our shop and buy exclusive cult movies and collector's editions directly from us on high definition Blu-ray. You can also join us on Patreon at patreon.com/cultandclassicfilms so you can get those exclusive cult movies delivered to you every month at a deep discount. Plus, you help us run and money goes directly to the filmmakers responsible. So you are supporting independent film. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Cult and Classic.
Welcome, friends and fiends of the pod, to another episode of Cult and Classic Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Nate Wyckoff, comedian, writer, and critic for HorrorNews.net. With us today is Amanda Longley. How are you doing, Amanda?
I'm great today. How are you, Nate?
I'm good. I'm excited for this discussion. Also with us, Tad Mastroianni. How are you doing, Tad?
What's up, chumps?
And with us, as usually, always, sometimes on every episode, Jeff Tucker. How are you doing, Jeff?
What up? I've been told I have a big head.
Yeah. Wait, I have a big head. I've been told that. That was my wife told me that very early on, and I was not. I was already aware. Okay, so this week's theme is family. All in the Family is the theme, and we have Goodnight Mommy, the very fascinating and well-received Austrian film by Severin, Fiala, and Veronika Franz. That's from 2014. And opposite that, we have Head of the Family, which is a personal favorite cult flick of mine, directed by Charles Band, of course, head of Full Moon Video and Trancers, 1984, he directed and wrote as well. And the story is actually by Charles Band, as many Full Moon Video ones are, but the script is written by Neil Marshall Stevens, who wrote a fair amount of big budget theater release films like the 13 Ghosts remake in 2001. So first up, Goodnight Mommy. So like I said, this is a well-received film. Just a note to anyone, if you're interested in seeing this film, it's a pretty solid production and you like kind of psychological indie gritty horror films, spoilers will affect this. So there are spoilers here. Skip ahead 45 minutes to Head of the Family if you don't want to experience that. But we're going to get right into it. The plot of Goodnight Mommy is two twin brothers, probably about age 10, right? I would think somewhere around there. I'm not good with ages, but they're kids.
12, something like
12,
that. Yeah,
somewhere around there. They're not quite teens yet. Th're preteen.
They're old enough to skin a cat. You know, so 12.
6, 5, my family 2. I don't know how old it is. Yeah, so they are at a rural, very nice, super European, mid-century modern house like they only have in Europe and only ever seem to show up in these indie films. They're there and their mom comes back from some sort of surgery with bandages all over, and they start to get convinced that she's an imposter. And it's not really their mom, even when the bandages come off and she seems to look pretty close to their mom. The twist ends up being that there is only one brother. The other brother died under circumstances that we'll discuss because it is open to interpretation. And the remaining brother, through guilt or some schizophrenic break, is imagining that the other brother's still alive and that the mom won't acknowledge him. And the result is the burning alive of the mother, presumably. There's some question on what really happens in this movie, which we'll get into, but that's the gist of it. Okay, so first up, let's do Tad. What'd you think?
All my time at the video store watching foreign films, this reminded me how many films I watched that had this style, where I'm like 3/4 of the movie way through, I'm like, what the fuck's the point of this movie? And then the ending happens, and I'm like, oh, now the whole movie makes sense, and I'm probably never going to watch this again. So, I mean, that's just my initial impression. I actually thought that a lot of the cinematography was fantastic. I thought that the twist was actually creative, and it's having an 8-year-old, yeah, I can see some of this stuff happening. At least some of it.
And I will say the scenery, the nature scenery, and sort of both the internal rooms of the house and the decor are quite fabulous, and the external nature is really beautiful. It's this whole film was shot on 35 millimeter, so it's not a digital film, and you can tell it looks very beautiful. The light is really saturated. I guess before we move on, just to kind of, although this film is subtitled in English and other languages, but it is not in English, so I won't play any clips, although there's very little dialogue in general throughout this entire feature. You could probably fit it on a couple of pages. I'll play just this clip from the beginning when the boys are running around outside with the ambient music they use to kind of give a vibe, because I feel like it sets the whole tone for the movie right away. And the sound, the sloshing, is this really bizarre, I don't know what kind of bog they're walking on, but I don't think we have them here in the US, or at least not in most places. It's like this hard, parched earth, peat moss kind of stuff on top of a bog. It looks fake. It looks like foam sitting on top of water that they're bouncing on, but it is, I guess, a real occurrence. And so it's really fascinating, and that's the sound. And you get a lot of sound in this movie, but very little dialogue. I don't know, Mandy, what was your take?
As a parent, it was kind of terrifying. Chad didn't really go that far, but yeah, it's extra scary in that sense. I also haven't really watched horror movies in the last 10 years, so it was a nice revisiting of that genre in general. And I really did appreciate the sets, like you said, the sets and the ambiance of the whole thing was really well done. I felt that I knew what was going on very, very early in the movie, and it was a little boring in that way, but I felt like the direction of the movie did a good job in maintaining the tension despite that.
Yeah, I think that, I didn't, we'll talk about expectations, because I think this movie had sort of, it hangs a lot on your expectations of the film, and there were certain things that I had expected that I didn't get, and things that I didn't expect that I did get, and it sort of affects how my overall interpretation of the movie. And I just want to say, the writer-director pair, they recently, last year, came out with their American feature, The Lodge. So if you've seen that or you're interested in that, highly recommend it. Again, they're in for beautiful cinematography. I think, and we'll get to what you think, Jeff, when I'm good and ready. What I think sort of will strike American audiences and probably UK audiences as well is that this is a very slow film. It's intentional, I think, because it's paced steadily. There's no jumps in pacing up and down. It's not uneven. It's a very slow burn, even slog through sort of it feels desolate. Even though they have this lush house, this beautiful nature, it feels desolate because they're isolated and there is so little communication of the verbal variety in this film. Jeff, what is your take on Goodnight Mommy?
Oh boy. Okay, so I actually say this to myself all the time, that I don't like horror films. And then I forget the fact that I really don't like certain genres of horror films. And the psychological and kind of more thriller focused horror films, I actually do really like. And I do really like this film quite a lot. There's no music in it, which is kind of almost haunting. That clip that you just played of the kind of the noise of
it's
the
just ambient tones.
It's all ambient tones throughout the whole thing. They walk through a crypt with bones, and it's just you just hear crunching of the bones, and it's it was weird that they never brought that place back, but it was just this really creepy spot.
So just to touch on that, because that was one of my first questions too, is I scoured, I'm like, are these real? Because it's they have these and actually New England might have some of these where all of us actually at one point in time are from. There's sort of communal crypts underneath the graveyard proper, where the basically the poor people's bones were. And oftentimes we still have the same place in almost every cemetery I can think of that's not a family plot, like in New Hampshire, but they're usually for the gardener or the tending tools. But it's the same thing. And I don't know, experts on old European grave sites would know more, but they do often have these piles of bones. I think they're probably real remains. I don't know that this movie, that they would have stocked this with fake remains that looked pretty good. But it does seem weird, especially to I guess American sensibilities, that you would have
trouncing through there.
A couple of real life twins just jumping through some corpses, essentially.
Yeah.
But it is a very effective scene. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think what we're getting to, both Mandy and Jeff, this is definitely a horror film. We do almost every genre in this podcast, and this is one of those horror films where it's not a monster film, it's not a slasher film, it's a solid psychological horror film. And it is, I think there is gore, not a ton, but the gore is very, I think, effective because it's very realistic. Everything is household related, and nothing is out of the realm of what we have in our homes.
It was almost like accidental gore.
Yes,
it was like never. Yeah, it wasn't like kind of, put there to like in your face. Right. It was like, somebody could have actually had this kind of like scenario happen.
Well, and I mean, we can get right into it, right? Basically, at one point in time, the kids are so convinced, it seems, that their mother could be somebody else, that they've tied her to the bed because she's having gone through a divorce and some sort of accident. You never really know if the accident is related to her surgery on her face or not, because she's also just gone through a brutal divorce. So it almost looks like she had lots of face work. She'd been touched by an angel. And that sort of head wrap. But I think my guess would be is that we're supposed to probably assume that it was related to the accident that we ultimately find out killed the other brother. But they tie her to the bed, and at one point in time, two super bossy Red Cross members come to try and seek donations, and I'm like, wow, that would not fly in the U.S. I don't know how. I need to look at how much power Red Cross has in I guess Eastern Europe, because they just barge right in. There's no one in the house, like no one's here, but the door's open. They're wandering around, calling out, and then there's a couple of kids, and they're like, "Is your mom home?" They're like, "No." I'm like, "Well, when will she be back?" I'm like, "Today." And they're like, "Can we wait?" And they're like, okay. And so they just start doing their business, sitting around at the table for an eternity. And one of them is like this very, I don't know what equates to this in Europe, but in the US, this is a very Midwestern, like young grandma who is just that's her personality. She's bought everything she says to the kids sounds almost like an accusation, even though she's presumably being nice. Like, she's just like, what do you do all day? Well, is your mother gone all the time? And you're just like, who are you? Get out of my house. But yeah, I'm off track. They come in, and the mom is trying to scream through her gag. They very close call, lots of tension. They leave. She gets the gag off, and they super glue her mouth shut. At which point, later on, to feed her, although they never seem to actually feed her, they carefully cut the thing and miss, and just blood is just really gross and comes out. And it's visceral because it's one of those things like what's the movie Feeding Sharks, where they have a paper cut on the eye, like really visceral things. It's like lips are so sensitive that I don't know about anybody else, but that was like a ooh. Yeah.
It was hard, but she was also like clearly trying not to cry out because she knew her more. And like it would not be in her best interest for them to stop cutting, and so that was like really interesting, like in the movie making.
Well, it's interesting because for a good chunk of the movie, I mean, we don't necessarily know if a twist is going to happen where it isn't their mom or something, because there's this scene when she's tied down, like she has a beauty mark, and then like they realize that it's rubbed. And she's like, they took it off at the hospital.
Well, she got splashed with water, and so it was like
right. They threw water on her, and so she's brushing it off. At which point, you're kind of like, why did she put it back on? And like, well, she clearly suspected maybe that they didn't think it was her, right? But it's just a weird moment where you're as the audience, you're like, I'm pretty sure this is their mom, but is it going to be their mom? You know, they find a picture where they're like, there's because they're twins, right? And they dress similarly. And then later on to mess with her, they dress the same, you think, and get the same haircut. But they see a picture in a photo album, and it's her dressed with another woman who looks identical, dressed the exact same way, covering her face with glasses and the whole deal. She's like, me and my friend used to dress alike. Who the fuck does that? I don't know. Unless you're 8-year-old twins, like who does that, right?
Nate, let's do it.
Let's dress the same. Let's dress the same.
Every morning, I want a report as to what to wear.
This is an audio podcast. As far as they know, we're all dressed the same. We're actually one body with 4 heads.
What was there a point where they insinuated that she was also a famous personality?
Yes, she was
she was
like a morning show host. It sounded like, and in the beginning,
I thought maybe she put her mold back on or painted it back on because it was like part of her identifying characteristics. Even though she got a whole bunch of facial surgery, it was like maybe she didn't want to let that part go because it differentiated her from the other hosts.
There's a lot of things that, as Mandy, you mentioned this after watching it, where you said I feel like there's a lot of Germanic and Austrian sort of symbology or symbolism and maybe some other context that we were missing, and I think that's probably true, but there's a lot of other things that are just straight up visual cues that I didn't get until going back and watching it and reading up on it, because I still didn't get some of them. So one of the theories going on is that there was a fire, and that was the accident, and that's what killed the other brother. I'm not sure how the accident and the face of the mother really would fit, because that did not look like a face transplant or skin grafts. Like that to me looked like facial reconstruction surgery, right? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I live in Southern California, and I'm pretty familiar with what that looks like. But there's, with that thought, because at the end the mother, we assume we see her die or engulfed in flames, right? When she's tried to escape, they've drug her back in. They've basically used fabric and nails to nail her to the floor. And she's like, it's me. And he's like, if you're really our mom, what is Lucas doing? Because the name are Elias and Lucas. And she's like, Lucas is dead. And that's the big reveal. Like, there is no Lucas. And of course we see Lucas going to light the drapes on fire, right? And she's like, I can't see him, he's dead. And he's like, you would know. And then he goes and lights the drapes on fire, and we know that, okay, it's in his head. But the fire motif then comes in, and once that happens, we look back, and at one point in time she's concerned or angry about what Elias is doing.
I'd say overly angry about.
She's very aggressive, right? Like she holds him down on the bed at one point, and another time she doesn't just slap him and say, she tells him, don't listen to your brother. And she's slapping him, and she's filming it on her phone, because we see it on the phone later, which, I mean, she's not necessarily, obviously she's under a lot of stress. She's just had surgery. She's lost a child, and she's gone through this divorce. Maybe because of that, we don't know.
Well, I think she also was clearly clinically depressed. She requested that all the the blinds the drapes, be closed, no visitors. Noise. Yeah, so I mean, she had a pretty clear.
She's sleeping with sleeping pills. Not that has to be, but that's part of it, right? She's sleeping a lot. She doesn't want to talk even to the kids. Sometimes they'll come in and she's awake. She's.
Now, what was with the crunchy toast? That was so creepy.
Dude, I didn't know what that was at first. I was like, what the hell is going on here? I love that. That was one of my favorite scenes.
I assumed it was some sort of weird Austrian treat. I'm like
what is going on?
And then there's so she's clearly clinical. There's problems, right? You're like, okay, these kids probably should not be in care with her anyway at this moment. They should not be isolated at this place. But there's a moment when when she's angry at him before she holds him down on the bed, I think, she finds a lighter in his room. I was like, what is this? And looking back then, you're like, oh, was it a fire, right, that killed the other brother? And maybe then you can insinuate, after watching the movie, was it the other brother that set the fire? And so you're like, interesting, okay. And because the other brother is the instigator, right? Even though he hangs back so often, he's the instigator.
Yeah, he's like the whispering on the shoulder, you know.
Right.
Like
And this is something, I don't know if you guys noticed this. I completely did not notice this. At the end, she's been lit on fire. The living room's in flames. And they show outside as emergency vehicles are coming. That's not their house that they've been in the whole time. That is a different house. So you're like, oh, is this the before incident that we're now watching? And this is where it gets super European, because no American film would try to fuck with our mind this way, in a way that they're like, they're not even going to notice this. Like, wait till Reddit gets a hold of this movie. So that's very interesting, because then it changes the whole concept. Then we don't really know what happened. We assume she's in flames and dead. And the last scene is really interesting. It's the two. We don't even see the kids really, but it's the two people running through the corn. You just see the corn move, which mirrors the beginning of the film, where the two brothers are playing sort of a weird hide and seek game in the corn. And then they come out and the mom is walking towards them, and it just shows all three of them together. So who knows if that means, okay, well, now the other son is dead and the mom's dead. They were both in this new fire and now they're all together. We don't know. There's no real, I don't find that there's a point in guessing. It's like either you just choose what you want to be in the end.
I mean, I took it like, it felt like he was just adding her to his like
imaginary group.
Imaginary universe.
Yeah.
And not her, but like his like perfect version of her.
Right, exactly.
Because she was like, like well dressed and happy and like
outside
smiling.
In the sun.
And,
right.
It was like
right. She doesn't want to see the sun. I mean, so here's a question, Tad. So, what did you think about the? We see Elias wake up a lot after scenes. And the time that it became really apparent to me is the scene where both brothers are watching, and the mother's it's at night, and the mother is walking out in her nightgown, still bandaged up, because she keeps putting them back on, right, for half the movie, into the woods. And then she gets into the woods, strips naked, and then she does this spooky head thing, which we actually did in the short film.
The spooky head thing. I was like, hey, I remember the spooky head thing.
Tad himself did the spooky head thing in a short film we did. But she does that, and then you're like, oh, this is getting supernatural. But then Elias wakes up, and we assume it's a dream. But then I realized he wakes up a lot in this movie. And does that mean the scene beforehand was also partly a dream? Because sometimes they are. He cuts the mother open at one point, or his brother Lucas does, and cockroaches come out, right? And we know that's a dream because she is all in one piece in the morning. So I don't know. What was your take on that, Tad?
Well, aside from the fact that it gave me flashbacks of when I had a sore neck for a week after doing the spooky head thing. As it went on, I realized that I think there were a lot of indications that the child probably already had some sociopathic tendencies before the events of this movie, and it's almost like the movie was showing him prep himself. Dancing through corpses, catching animals. The whole cat thing was weird, but at the same time, it didn't seem malicious that he was trying to kind of like nurse the cat, and then the cat just kind of just died.
Yeah, the cat is one there. That's what they find when they go in the crypt. There's a cat laying there, and you get the impression right away that the cat is sick because it's hiding. Number one, which is what cats would do, and it lets them pick it up and take it home. And it doesn't look. I mean, it's a real live cat, so clearly it's fine. Like, it was not sick at the time, but you get the impression it's sick, and then they find it having run away before, because they seem afraid that the mom's going to find it, although she supposedly loves animals, right? Which is one of their cues, like. Anyway, he dies, and then they do this weird thing. We're going to go back, but this weird thing where they put, as like to get back at the mom or to somehow trigger her, they take an aquarium they have for whatever reason, it's the aquarium that all the cockroaches are in, because the kids have these hissing cockroaches as pets, and there's like hundreds of them. That's just disturbing. And they empty it out, and then they put the cat in what we assume is formaldehyde, some chemical, because I assume it's not gasoline. It would have evaporated. The mother would never leave that in the house, but it's some sort of flammable liquid, and they put the cat in it, and the cat is just, the corpse of the cat is just floating in this thing, and it's disturbing. It's not, like you said, Ted, it doesn't seem malicious really. The cat is dead and they tried to care for the cat. Like it's not like they murdered the cat, which is the fear in this movie the whole time. I'm like, please don't kill the cat. Like, this is not, the cat died, and then they put it in this thing, and the mom, also very depressed, we assume, Jeff, just leaves it there. It's like, I fucking can't deal with this, right? It's a weird image, the whole thing. Like, and then once this happens, and I'm ranting because this is such a strange moment that really is like at the core, I think, of this movie. Like, that's sort of a turning point. The mom is like, fine, you want to play this game? She doesn't say that, but that's the impression. She goes upstairs, gets where they put the cockroaches in a jar, and dumps a bunch of like a handful in the water. And that drives the kids out to try and save them. Right. And it's a weird thing because, one, we've been told that she loves animals, and well, some people wouldn't say cockroaches are animals. They're big enough to be able to tell when they don't want to drown. Okay. I don't know what you're saying. So that's a weird moment. But it also is like indicative of this push and pull game that they're playing the whole movie. Like, the mother doesn't just want to come out and communicate anything, and the kids don't want to come out and communicate anything. And so what happens instead is it just gives, Ilias free reign for his other self, his brother, to sort of start guiding events. And the mother's sort of checked out, and her erratic behavior, which is clearly different than what she was before all this happened, is just driving that on. And you just watch it get worse and worse. And it has such a feeling of discomfort as you view it. Mm-hmm. And Jeff, I don't know if you felt that way too. Like, you watch it, like, this is really good, but I'm getting sort of nauseous with tension. Like, it can only get worse.
Yeah, that's like the sign of a good thriller, right? Make you as uncomfortable as possible without making you leave the room, right? So I agree. Like, it felt very real. It felt like very plausible. As like this woman that's clearly sick, who has maybe is unable to like face the same problem that the kid is, and so they're both going through trauma, and they need some outside help clearly, and for some reason it's not there. Like, who's taking care of this kid before she returned?
Right.
Like,
right.
I don't actually understand. Himself. Yeah, like what was going on there? Like, clearly they needed some help.
We kind of assume that maybe the dad was there, because in the beginning they're playing a video game on his phone, and she's like, no, for whatever reason. We don't know why she's so against this. But she says no. And they're like, well, Dad. And she goes, no, I don't, whatever. Like, Dad's not here or whatever. So we can assume that. And maybe then he left because he knew she was coming back. But it just gives you an uncomfortable feeling, right? Because especially in, I feel like the US, I think this is probably, I would guess, a US thing where it's very odd to see young kids out by themselves not in nature, but in nature that is so potentially dangerous. Like, they're going under underpasses in the beginning, and they're floating on lakes by themselves. Especially when you find out that one of the kids has died, you're like, this is just a weird,
and through
weird neglect.
Potentially an accident that was caused by one of them.
Right.
There does seem to be something missing there.
And here's an interesting thing that I read, which is fascinating, is and this is, by the way, I thought the kids did a very good job. It's their debut film, and they didn't have a huge amount of lines, but everything is acted physically, and they do a lot of very nuanced acting because they just observe a lot and don't show emotion. But then when they do, I found it very realistic. It wasn't forced. Like, in one of the later scenes when her lip's been cut, she's bleeding. They've actually, like, they burned a cockroach with a magnifying glass. They burned her cheek, which is a disturbing scene. And I think it's Ilias is like, Mom, tell us, prove you're our mother. Because usually they're asking, tell us where our mother is. And then they say, prove you're our mother. And she basically, you assume she doesn't. Right? Like, he says, what's Lucas's favorite song? And she says a song, which I don't know what the song was, but it was apparently not the right answer.
Some cultural element we were missing. Yeah.
So and that's like basically the breaking point, right? Like that's when the kids no longer bother. They ask her, but it's sort of, it's really, well, if you're not going to tell us where your mother is, I guess we'll kill you. And I don't exactly remember. Oh, what I was going to say is it turns out, so the cast did not get the script, period. They were told the line, like I assume they were told the lines and the scenes. And this was fascinating to me. And I think that this is probably had an interesting effect. This film was filmed sequentially. It was not filmed out of sequence. So we actually see the progression of these characters. And I wonder, especially to first-time film actors, they may have acted before in other mediums, but if that helped the kids especially with this, because they could follow a narrative.
So there's actually a couple situations where like for example, when Mother dragged Elias up to the bathroom or whatever room to film this, like telling him not to talk to his brother, normally in these types of things they won't show like the like I guess the manifestation, the hallucination of the other character, but he was outside of that room like slamming on the door, right? And that was the perspective that we had, which kind of like almost is like a way of saying like this isn't how that movie is played out. Like there was just certain things that they did playing like kind of against the normal rules as to like how you play out like hallucinations.
I think too,
Fight Club rules, you could say.
Yeah, Fight Club rules. Well, and there's a lot of other films, and everyone that comes to mind is a foreign film, so maybe that's part of it, except for Fight Club. I saw one. If you go on IMDb, it's always interesting to see other people's opinions. So I like doing it before coming into a discussion like this. And one is, somebody said this is strikingly similar to the Korean film A Tale of Two Sisters. I think it's from like 2003, 2004, somewhere in there. I love that film. And I would hazard to say it's actually not like it at all, except for the fact that it's about siblings and one of them is not there. But otherwise, but that's, to me, that's actually a trope, especially with twins, that we get when we have twins in a story, or siblings in a story. There's a great 90s Two-Face comic miniseries. I can't remember if Alan Grant or Grant Morrison, I can't remember who wrote it, but it was fantastic, where Two-Face ends up having had a brother that died in a fire, and that's the nasty part of his brain. There's some great things like that. The idea that people, we're seeing the hallucination side of it, so it's tricking us into thinking that what the delusional character thinks is real. We see that in High Tension, the French Hot Tension, which is a phenomenal film, and sort of like this, but with a really gore slasher edge, but a very good, very disturbing film by Alexander Aja, or Aja, I don't know if he pronounces the J, but one of the new godfathers of gore from a few years back. Really, really fantastic film. But they do that as well. And that brings me to my one complaint, I guess, with this film. And I did enjoy it. I'm glad I watched it, but I waited a long time to see this movie because the trailers and the imagery they chose to go with, like the poster and everything, is very strong, very well done. I was actually a little disappointed with the resolution because it was actually more pedestrian than I kind of thought it might be. And the reason I say that is because the idea of someone actually taking over, trying to usurp the life of another person, to me is less trod on than the sort of fake out, this person's not here, or this person can't see this person, or that sort of thing. Not that it's a bad step. It was totally well planned out, I feel, and I feel like it was a strong payoff. But to me, the idea that if we had actually been brought around to, yes, it's the mom, and then it turned out not to be the mom, because we have, frankly, every indication that the kids have is pretty strong. She's checked out enough that she doesn't recognize they're talking about her when they describe her to a T in the beginning of the film. She looks mostly like her, but it's after a facial surgery, so she's puffy. She's drawing on the beauty mark. Like, those are really good red herrings, and it would have actually been nice if they'd done a double back and it hadn't been her. and also it would have been interesting because maybe there just could have been something a little less pedestrian than a delusional person. That sort of disappointed me a little bit. It reminds me of the film Guillermo del Toro produced, which is a great film, The Orphanage, another foreign film, of course. It's not that the resolution and the film wasn't great, but when it turns out that it's haunted because kids were killed, you're like, well, okay, yeah. I mean, I go see horror movies. I kind of expected that would be the case. It didn't break my expectation. So while I was surprised to find out that Lucas was actually dead, and it was fun piecing together, I think the intricacies of the details of trying to piece together what actually happened adds a great deal of interest. But the actual reality of the situation itself was less interesting than a potential situation. And I feel like there are films that fall prey to that. You know, it's very clever, but it wasn't as interesting as what I was hoping. I don't know if anybody else had a similar vibe.
I mean, I kind of get where you're coming from on this one. Like now you're playing my role of rewriting the film.
Yes.
This one was, and maybe I don't watch enough of this type of film, so that this didn't feel redundant to me, or didn't feel like it was earned. But like, I don't know, like there's like a lot of things where you're like, oh, a mother couldn't possibly act like that. Like, why would she drag her son into this room and then like tell her not to talk to her brother? Like, you couldn't possibly have a reason for doing that. Yeah. And then it comes through that it's like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. Right. She doesn't do it well.
It's not a nice thing.
Yeah, but it's like it makes sense that she's like, okay, I don't know how to deal with this. You know, just stop. You know, stop talking to your brother. Like he doesn't exist. But like I don't know. I thought there was enough stuff in there, like enough details and enough things that
I think it works.
Yeah, and like I love that there's no music in this movie. The sets were amazing.
The sets were stunning.
And you really like if you think about it, you go to like a producer and like, yo, I want to make this movie. Okay, it's gonna have 2 kids and a mother. There's gonna be almost no dialogue. I'm not gonna put a soundtrack over it. We're just gonna have these 2 children just carry this whole thing. You know, it's just like sold. I'm gonna buy that. It's just like it seems implausible, but I think that maybe is the beauty of foreign film is you know the gates to entry are maybe a little bit less. They don't need the movie to perform as well to you know to have it go.
What's interesting to me is as you said that, I wonder, this movie is of course beautiful and film is expensive in general to shoot on, especially compared to digital, but I feel like they were able to do so much with so little. Before we do these, I always make cheat sheets, right? Which have, you know, a little bit of background on the cast and crew. And I love movies like this because it takes me, you know, 5 minutes. Because there's a couple of other people in this film, but really it's just the 2 brothers whose actual names are Lucas and Elias. And
that was the creepiest thing in the whole film.
I know.
Why did you name them the same? Because you didn't just happen to find 2 twins that were the same names as the twins in your script. Well, they wrote their names onto the script for some reason.
It was probably easier. They could respond to their own names, and it felt more natural that way. Yeah, maybe. Or they were lazy. Who knows?
It's just creepy.
Just feel bad for the kids because they get older, they'll have the same names in there when there's this movie.
Yeah.
Oh, look at you, little killer. You delightful little killers.
It reminded me when you said that, though, I'm like, you use what you have, right? And obviously, if you have access to something like this beautiful house in countryside, like, you're going to use it if you're smart. And I always think of, whenever I think of that, I always think of David Duchovny or Duchovny. I never know how to pronounce his name, but he's a director. He's worked a lot with Full Moon Films and Roger Corman and such. We'll get into Full Moon Films again with the next film, but he's done several sort of family films, and they take place in the same house there's been sort of, quote, I guess you would say sexy movies and gay themed sexy movies in, and he reuses it because it's a beautiful house with a great, you know, pool yard, like a yard with a pool and front yard and all this stuff. Totally understand why he uses it again. But it's funny because in that case, you see the decor is identical to each of the films. So like if you watch, and both of these have been done by Riff Tracks, which is, I will hazard to say, the only way to really watch these because they are tough to get through otherwise, is there is a wooden statue, like a sculpture that is essentially 2 tines on a piece of like smoothed wood that are sort of like legs, and it has stiletto-heeled red leather or pleather boots on it. And it's bizarre to see a kids movie or a family film where no one is addressing this insane sexualized sculpture of wood. Just a side note.
I mean, but that's on a similar track to like the set in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
There is some pretty crazy artwork.
There is. It's a great house, right? Like I would burn
awesome
someone alive for that
but
house.
it's like very ominous artwork. These shadowy figures, almost like, are they really there? Or are they not? Like, are they? Are they family portraits of some sense, or just artistic statements, or like what? They're very mysterious, and they're everywhere in the house, and they're looming large over the play of the actors themselves.
There's it makes me think, like if you look at it's sort of like the 2019 Best Picture winner Parasite, the Korean film. The house is beautiful, and that house, this one is like that on steroids. It's so modern, but it's also mid-century modern. There's curves. The two kids are sitting together at one point near the beginning, having like a burping contest in these clear lucite hanging bulb chairs in the living room, right? Like, I mean, it's so bizarre. They're like Christmas ornaments that you sit in, you know what I mean? And it adds something to the film that if they just filmed it in an apartment complex, which you could do, the script doesn't require any of these accoutrements, it wouldn't have had the same effect, because it is someone I know said this about the film Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks, and I think it's true. Every single frame from this movie could be framed and put on a wall. It's beautifully composed, and the quality is very high. And I think that adds to this sort of, you get lost in the picture, and it carries you even though what's happening on screen is very slow. And I say slow because I think it is slow. I think that there's a lot of, it's not filler, but it forces you as the viewer to pay attention to the most minute details, because you sit with these people in silence for minutes on end. I don't know.
There's no distractions.
Yeah, it's sort of like yoga. My wife is a yoga teacher, and I said that way, just like sit with it. Don't, if your mind drifts, bring it back. And I'm always like, my ADD brain is like I'm trying to plan my next 2 weeks out, in every 30 seconds that I sit there. Tad, I don't know, like you said you had a hard time because it's very sort of indicative of those late 90s, early 2000 indie films that were so the rage for a while.
They were the rage, and I'm not going to get into the rant on how I think The Science of Sleep was the most bullshit film I ever watched in history, because it did the same tricks, and the resolution was equally as infuriating to me. Actually, no, it was way more infuriating than this movie. This movie actually had a resolution where I was like, okay, so the moral of the story is the kids burn the family, and then they get to be reunited. Yay! Other than that, yeah, like I was saying before, the whole movie is, maybe you realize it, maybe Mandy realized it way before than I did, but the whole movie is basically watching the kid have constant psychotic breaks, which you mentioned with the dreams and all that, and good misdirection, I got to say, because I didn't realize I was watching a 9-year-old psychotic breaks throughout the entire movie.
And I mean, we've seen films like this before. It is exactly what we said. It is a huge misdirect. It's the same thing that the jokes the world over, or at least mostly the Western world over, utilize, which is we're paying attention to something else entirely, and so we miss something that has a lot of cues along the way. Identity was a sort of more Americanized example of that, right? Like we think that it's this serial killer killing all these people, and then we find out that it's literally one personality killing other personalities in the head of a madman. So it's spoiler alert. So it's it works. And I think this film, Jeff, I think you're right. I think the details make the difference here and elevate it from something that's a one-trick pony to a film that we could have a much longer discussion about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think without the details, like the whole film is just a boring film watching some kids, do psychotic things. But there are it's like a ping pong, right? Like, I think these really good, like, you really like give like two options. It's like, oh, is this really their mom? Like, clearly not. She's not being very mom-like. And then, oh, these kids are doing psychotic things. And then, then mom's not being very mom-like. And then, oh, these kids are being like psychotic. So it's kind of you bounce back and forth between these two ideas. Oh, is it really their mom? Are these kids crazy? Is it really their mom? These kids crazy. And then the final thing is, oh, the kid's crazy, but there's only one of them. So you kind of ping pong back and forth between these two ideas. And then there's a third idea that they introduce. And it's like, oh, yeah, everything that happened previous to this makes perfect sense. I think that there were maybe enough clues that you could kind of get mostly there. I don't think you could maybe say for certainty based on the clues.
There's that sweet spot
the result was.
Where it's like you get enough that you don't feel cheated, but you didn't get enough that you got super bored unless you're a genius like Mandy. But
exactly.
Well, here's the thing. The biggest clue is the one that they open the film with, right? Not the song. It opens with a song in German. I don't know what the song is in German, but it ends with Goodnight. And then it shows before the mom gets home, right? The kids are just doing stuff. They're floating on the lake. They're going in an underpass. Well, one of the brothers always goes ahead and leaves the other one. And that sort of, then you're like, oh, okay, one of them has moved on and somehow. And then of course you find out, but it's the reflection that brings that to light. It's not an obvious moment. We've forgotten because of all this other shit that's happened. I also want to say, I think if you listen to this without seeing the movie, it can very easily sound like these kids are, where it turns out to be just Elias, is a mad person and none of this would be realistic. But I think that the scariest part is that it's just the next step from those kids' pretend play games, right? Those imaginary games. Like if you think of the beginning, to make it literary, if you go to the beginning of, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, right? The kids are all in this boys only club planning to essentially murder the grown-ups and take all the stuff. And it's play. It's still disturbing, I think, to read, but it's sort of like, of course, they're not really going to be pirates and pillage and plunder and whatever. But that's the play. And this is one of those things where this kid is just, he's doing that. And then he actually does it. It's that one step that takes you there. And it's just another one of those films that makes you terrified of children in certain ways. And I think that the lack of communication is what's key, because things are happening, but no one is acknowledging them between each other. And it allows this insane event to happen.
That's correct. Yeah.
Well, okay. So I'm going to wrap this up. Mandy, would you recommend this film, and to who?
Oh, I would recommend this film. As we've talked about already, it's absolutely beautiful. I think that the actors that are in this are very talented, although they are new. I would recommend it to, anyone that likes psychological thrillers or is looking to become interested in psychological thrillers, because I think it's a good example of that. I would have liked to see more breadcrumbs kind of sprinkled, pointing the finger in both directions at the kids and the mother being an imposter. But I think that they did a really good job.
All right, Tad, your take on this.
I'd recommend it to parents because this is a fabulous family movie. Absolute love-in.
Well, Jeffrey, who would you recommend this film to, and why?
I guess to those that are like me and are like, oh, I hate horror films, and then we're reminded of this genre that's more about the kind of the psychological and mental kind of torment that's actually really interesting rather than kind of going for shock value. I think it's a lovely film. I think just for the sets, man. Just see. I assume there's just Austrian countryside and buildings. Just go for that. There's a street that they clear out in one scene. I feel like this must be the way filmmaking is in some of these countries. Is they're so excited about a film being made in their town, they're like, "Yep, we'll clear the streets of everything, all dirt,
yes.
all cars, all people, everything's gone. Shoot your movie." I don't know. It creates this really interesting like we said, desolate, empty world that's filled with zero music except for a dude with an accordion walking down that exact street that I was talking about.
Yeah, we didn't mention that, but that's a weird moment. He has like a limp, and he's the only one there. But anyway,
yeah. So it's like, yeah, it's just there's so many details in this movie. It really is a great movie. Whether the end really does it for you or not.
And that goes to me, I guess. We should mention, by the way, the mother, Mutter, is mother, is Suzanne Weiss, who is a phenomenal actress, and she also apparently speaks English fluently with no accent, so that's impressive. But she's phenomenal in this, and she acts most of her role wrapped in gauze and just her head movements. The first time she turns around to look at the kids, I mean, it's stirring, and she does very well with the limited lines. So I would recommend this film to anyone who wants a very well-crafted film that will make them uncomfortable, because sometimes those are hard to choose. Like you just have to gear yourself up and go, well, I'm just going to start it and watch it. Even in retrospect, especially for gorehounds, like there isn't actually that much violence in the film, but it's very visceral, and the dread of it is very strong. And I think that that's sort of what really, really will affect people. So I recommend anyone looking to.
It's effective when it happens. Very effective.
Very much so. So kudos, and check out The Lodge, their next film as well. So this next movie, guys, this is the epitome of a cult film. In my opinion, if someone were to say, what's a cult movie, that I'd be like, oh, well, that they haven't heard of, I would say Head of the Family from 1996. This movie is, like I said, one of the Full Moon family, directed by Charles Band, brother of Richard Band, the composer who does a lot of the music for Full Moon Pictures or Full Moon Entertainment or any number of their alternative titles. And Head of the Family is such a weird movie. It's billed as a comedy horror, and I think that's accurate. It does not take itself seriously. There's no gore. Well, there's a little bit of special effects, blood and surgery things, but the general plot could be in any number of movies, but with one exception. There is a family of bizarre freaks as side characters. And the plot is this person, played by Blake Adams, named Lance, and his girlfriend, Loretta, played by Jacqueline Lovell. They're having an affair. Jacqueline is married to another person who is a drug-dealing biker that is a dangerous dude. Well, she wants Lance to kill him, and then they can be together. And this is somewhere in the South in a small town, the old South kind of thing. And so Blake's like, I can't really kill anybody. But then he witnesses this family of weirdos. What are they? The stack houses, I think. Yeah. They're 5 siblings, right? Otis, played by Bob Schott, who is a very big guy and a great actor. He was Thorg in Jim Cotta for martial arts fans. He was also in a ton of other movies all the way up through 96 from the 70s. He is the big muscle guy who's not very smart. You have Ernestina, who is played by Alexandria Quinn, an adult film actress with, well, it's not a surprise. She's very pretty. And then you have, let's see, Wheeler, played by James Jones, who has these he wears glasses, and then when they take him off, he has this reveal. He has giant bulging eyes that never close, and he can hear like super well. Like that's his superpower. And then you have the head of the family, the titular head of the family, who is played by J.W. Para, and the character's name is Myron. And he's a head with arms and legs who is wheelchair bound. The physical effects are pretty good. They're classic, all practical effects, no 3D. And the Myron, the head of the household, is having the family controlled via telekinetic ability to steal people off the road and do these bizarre surgeries on them. And then he keeps them in the basement when they're basically vegetables or otherwise no longer capable of doing any harm to anything. And his entire plan, it sounds like, is to get his head put in a body, although later he says it's to rule the world. So who knows? The gist of it is that Blake blackmails them because he sees them kidnap someone. He blackmails them to get rid of this biker dude, and then he doesn't stop there. He continues to blackmail them for money. And then things go south when the family then kidnaps him and his girlfriend, Loretta, and sort of have a big hullabaloo. Sounds very complicated. It's really not. I'm just not explaining it on point. It is a couple who bumps off the woman's husband and then gets in trouble because they blackmail this family of superhuman mutants. And those mutants then steal them and are like, well, we're going to experiment on you. Did I do that justice at all?
I think you got all the points.
Okay. The reason I struggle with this one is because there's a lot of weird little things here and there. But we're going to jump right into it. Jeff, what did you think of this film?
There was like no likable character in it, first of all. So it's just a film of unlikable people, which you can't make a horror film. Like, it's not a horror film, first of all, but you can't make a horror film without a likable character because you have to have somebody that you're like, oh, I don't want these horrible things to happen to. So it's like all the characters are like, they get mutilated, whatever. They're all fucking terrible. But I thought the interplay between the big head and the other asshole that was like our main character, I guess, was interesting. They do this weird thing though, where he's like the other asshole is like not smart. Like everybody's like constantly being like, "Oh, you're a dumbass," but like he's very clearly intelligent. Like everything that he does is like, you know, it really is like a battle of wits between the big brain and this guy.
You're talking about Blake, the blackmailer.
Yeah, Blake. Yeah, the blackmailer.
Lance. Blake Adams. Lance.
Sure. Yeah. Lance. Yeah. Anyways, so I don't know. I thought it was interesting. It's just so weird when like you have a movie like this where like the tension is supposed to be built off of you liking somebody and not wanting them to like die or like, you know, you want some side to win. In this case, it's kind of like everybody's horrible, so I don't care.
Interesting. So here's my take on that. I actually don't think they are all terrible. You're totally right on that. But I don't think you have to have someone to like, sort of because it's a morality play. And you know what it plays out to me is it plays out like a Tales from the Crypt episode. In those episodes, your main character who you're following is usually a bad person. And they usually get their comeuppance. It's more, instead of you have somebody to root for, you're waiting for someone to get punished. And that's the flip side of the coin is it's more like they have to have their due. Tad, what's your take on it?
All right, now we're in a movie that's much more up the cult and classic alley. So I was going to say the same thing Jeff said. I thought that the dialogue between Blake and Myron?
Myron.
Yes. I thought the dialogue between them was fantastic, and I feel like Myron was the only one that a script was written for, and everything else was just ad-lib, which you know me. I love that. I love if a actor can really ad-lib well, I think it works better than a script ever would. It's one of those things. I looked at this and I got the vibes of Bad Channels just from sort of the visuals. And the fact that I definitely prefer a movie that has a lot of over-the-top characters in them. It really keeps me engaged. I had so many moments where I was just like, what is the point of this?
Right.
Like 30 minutes of the movie goes by, and I'm like, what is the plot of this movie?
Well, let's start with this, because I'm going to play a clip. And this is between Blake, who is, for lack of anyone else, the protagonist of the film, right? He's the one he's trying to best Myron and this group of siblings, because they're all siblings, and Myron says they're actually from the same egg, right? They're supposed to be twins, but nature had something else in mind, and they all became these weird superhuman people, which he controls. So this is when Lance has figured out that he can blackmail the Stackpoles, that's the name, the Stackpoles, to do what he wants, which is bump off this guy. He goes in and he's excited because he owns or runs, I don't know if he owns it, but he runs this diner, and he goes and he talks to his one staff member that we see regularly, this sort of regular diner lady. Like, she's probably played a diner in 30 movie, a diner waitress in 30 movies. And I would hazard to say she's the good person in this film, the one person.
You're correct.
Here we go. This is her and him.
Well, where in the Sand Hill have you been? I ain't seen you since the day before yesterday.
Not to worry, Susie, my dear.
Oh, we're on my backside. Me and Ray been running this place alone. Shoot, Lance, I thought somebody was sprinkling lime on what was left of you.
Well, I just had a little business to attend to out of town. Very important business. It's going to make all the difference. Everything's going to be peaches and cream from here on out. Perfect timing. See, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Lance, didn't you mess with them stack fools?
Mess with them? I ain't gonna mess with them, huh? It's business.
And the actress playing Susie is Vicky Skinner, who's been in a handful of movies, probably most interesting Fugitive Rage in 1996, right before this film, I believe. And that sets the tone, right? Like, to me, it literally, if you've never seen a Full Moon Pictures film, which, as Tad mentioned, Bad Channels is another one of, it is this sort of like, like a little bit of goofy often, with their bizarre, like, it's definitely a film for adults, but it's a film for adults that people who watched Pee-wee's Playhouse would enjoy, if I'm anything to go by. And it gives that sort of, everyone has the Southern charm, but it's all that, like, oh, they're trying to escape the trailer park. And again, I'm using that as an example. I'm not dissing anyone who lives in a trailer or mobile home. I yearn for the day when I can afford a mobile home. Okay, so I'm saying that right now. But that's sort of the vibe of that. And the quality of the writing is sort of on par with that. Some are pretty good lines, others are just okay. Tad, I see what you're saying. Some of it's pretty stilted though, so I think it was written down, but I don't think people had a great amount of time to memorize it. I may just be guessing on that. Mandy, what's your take on this film?
I really love the tone that was set by the opening credit music over the house.
Yeah.
Is my audio okay, by the way? Because my connection is
It's okay. It's a little choppy, but we'll make do.
Okay, great. My computer keeps warning me that it's not great. So anyway, I really love the opening music just being like just so goofy. And like the still shot of this house, I think is supposed to look ominous, but honestly just looks like a house in Massachusetts to me.
It does.
I'm like, that could be my neighbors, and that's not that creepy. And I was surprised by all of just the gratuitous sex of like the two like characters. I was like, wait, what? Oh, okay, I guess that's happening. Like, there's not a lot of gore, but they're just gonna go for like,
because you don't expect it, right? Because it's sort of a goofy movie. Like, it feels like you could watch it with your kids, except for the huge amount of nudity and sex.
Yeah,
You know what, Nate? This is
like the softcore porn nature.
Yeah, basically.
And I'm surprised that nobody else mentioned that yet, because there's a lot of it.
I haven't. So the only woman who is nude in this film regularly and nude a lot of this film.
I think almost every scene except for the first scene.
Right, is Jacqueline Lovell. And I actually think she is probably next to J.W. Para, who plays Myron, the head in the chair. I think she's the strongest actress. She's actually quite good. She brings, especially when she mugs, like she has to do facial expressions, especially near the end when she's arguing with her at the time boyfriend. But she actually, her career prior to acting was primarily nude modeling. So she was actually the #1 nude model in '95. She was in 1996 when this movie came out. She'd been in over 150 magazines, like everything from Playboy to Penthouse and a good jillion others. So she had a career prior to this, and it was nudity. And so I think that was really made clear in this film, because she actually is quite comfortable doing, at least she seems that way, who knows personally, but she seems very comfortable doing full scenes nude, which I think a lot of people, I certainly wouldn't be. And I think that's interesting. I also think it's interesting that she was quoted as saying, "I'm sick and tired of doing movies where they just want a bunch of love scenes. It's getting kind of old. I feel like I've done my share." she started turning those down. I don't know if that's true, looking at her biography, of her bibliography of films. But regardless, she's beautiful. She can do what she wants. I think she acted the part really well, whether or not they had her nude or not. She could have not been nude for she could have not been nude for the entire film, to be honest. They could have done the sex scenes mostly clothed. It would have been fine.
Or just gotten rid of like most of them.
Well, there's sort of the goofy humor, right? Because when they're planning what to do about her husband, her character and Blake Adams' character, they're doing it literally while they're having sex in the break room or in the storeroom of the thing. And it's comical, right? Because they're having sex on a prep table or something, and then it's just shot like a typical scene. There's a master shot and then 2 over the shoulder shots, and they're both just bouncing up and down at many points, clearly not even next to each other. Like, it's, and that's not to say that the sex isn't sort of realistic. Like, I have to say, at least in this film, when people have sex, at least their parts are lined up. Is that weird to say? Because so often, especially in like theater films, I'm watching, like, why even have a love scene if they can't even be in the same like time zone? What is happening here? I'm like, I didn't know you could get pregnant with your belly buttons. I didn't know that happened, but apparently, according to Hollywood, that's what happened. So, well, it's not necessary. I'm sure that it caused this movie to be rented more than a few times, which was the goal of these films, these direct-to-video films. So, I think we kind of know why it's there. And I think I think Jacqueline Lovell did a great job with it. My only argument is, I'm like, don't. She doesn't have to have clothes on, but Blake Adams should also be nude more often. Like, he has one scene where he's nude in the bed with her, and he's also an attractive looking guy. They cast attractive people in this movie opposite the Stackpoles, and it just equality. That's all I'm saying. People, take everyone's clothes off.
Sure.
So yeah, and going into this film, I was actually a little surprised that Alexandria Quinn, who plays the sexy Stackpole, Ernestina, was not the one to do the vast majority of the nude scenes. Not that she has to, but she's the one who is a really prolific adult film actress. I think her last one was in 2012, My Mommy Bangs Brothers 2. So
Nate does his research.
Here's the thing this is the best part ever, and I love her for this. I know I don't know Alexandria Quinn personally, but it made me so happy to be going through her really, really like massively extensive adult film list. And then her third from last one in 2010, she was the voice of Twisting Girl in Scooby-Doo Curse of the Lake Monster. That made everything worth it. And I respect her, because if I had a chance, if I were an adult film, I would then want to be in a Scooby-Doo movie. And that's not even a joke. It sounds like a joke. That would be super awesome to me.
No,
so
that's how you butter Nate up, is have anything to do with Scooby-Doo, and that's
Totally.
it, you're sold.
Totally,
Like
absolutely.
me and Ninja Turtles.
Ninja Turtles, and interesting you mentioned that, because according to the makers of this, I don't know whether it was, I assume it was Charles Band who said this, but the films that inspired the feel and vibe for this were in fact Ninja Turtles.
God damn it!
And I know every single
How
time.
does this keep happening?
Because Ninja Turtles is unbelievably brilliant, but it was inspired by the Munsters and Ninja Turtles, and that makes sense because the Munsters, like. The Stackpoles clearly have that Munster vibe. I also am pretty sure that there's a Hills Have Eyes vibe here, because the Hills Have Eyes, for anyone who hasn't seen that, or the remake, which is quite terrifying and uncomfortable, very well done. Also an Alexander Aja film. We mentioned him last time. I think, it's about a town of presumably nuclear mutated people who hunt people who travel cross country through their desert. Very disturbing. Michael Berryman was in the original, and I met him. Very interesting guy. So back to the point, back to things everyone can relate to. This movie is super goofy. It's intended to be sort of, I think, a late night Showtime sort of movie. It's got a lot of nudity, but it also has some comedy. And, if you get tired of the sex, well, it's got weird, freaky monsters in it.
This is the movie that My Mom's a Werewolf wishes it was, but couldn't be.
Sure. Yeah, in My Mom's a Werewolf, the sexual perversion is just implied. And this one, it's actually tamer because it's so in your face and out in the open, I think. Let's listen to the scene. And we've mentioned this, but J.W. Para, who plays Myron, the head, who has tons of, I mean, he's more makeup effects than man. He does an awesome job, and his voice, I think, sells it 100%. This is him explaining to the character of Lance, when he tries to blackmail him, their whole deal. There we go.
Holy shit, them some big eyes, brother.
You've met my brothers and my sister, Mr. Bogan. I don't believe we've ever met.
Well, I kind of figured I'd remembered if we had.
No doubt. My name is Myron Stackpool. I'm pardon the expression, the head of the family. As you have perhaps noted, we Stackpools all have our peculiarities. We're quadruplets, you know, all born from the same egg. Theoretically, we should be identical, but, well, strange things do happen.
No shit.
Do you know what you're looking at, Mr. Bogan?
Escapees from a freak show?
You're looking at a unique biological phenomenon. 4 genetically linked beings, each endowed with a share of normal abilities, enhanced to almost supernatural proportions. Otis, many times stronger than any normal man. Wheeler, with eyes sharper than an eagle's, ears like a fox, nose like a hound dog. Ernestina, well, I hardly need tell you about her special powers. As for me, well, yes, I should say so.
So that, I think that's a great, I mean, yes, of course, it's all exposition. There's no question about that. But his voice is phenomenal, and I actually, and maybe this is me being ridiculous, but before this, I actually had to look to make sure that he wasn't perhaps a person with some sort of physical deformity, because one, I wanted to talk about it if so, but also they played it pretty well. They gave just like, hey, you're a head with arms and legs, and you have to operate an motorized wheelchair, and he played it like that, right? He uses his arms to do the wheelchair, and then his head is there, and it seems just as uncomfortable and difficult to maneuver as you would expect it would be were this really his body, right? J.W. Para, he did a few movies. Most recently, unfortunately, it was 1998, Kra, the Seer Monster, which is kind of a great film. But I want to mention that, interestingly enough, you might recognize on this podcast the last name Para, P-E-R-A, because he's married to Penny Para, who is the casting director for Batteries Not Included, and Cocoon and a gajillion other films. She is an incredibly prolific and fantastic casting director. So everything really is tied together here in Hollywood and the surrounding film empire. So let's talk about this, right? I don't know, one thing that made me, first off, I want there to be a sequel to this film. This film really could have a sequel. And the reason I say that is because there's so much that's not really explored. Like, we know the Stackpools have a lot of money. Apparently they have resources like oil and other things on their land. That's why Lance wants to blackmail them. And Myron's, like he said, I need a body. Like, obviously he's tired of being, like, he actually has those stabilizers on his head to sort of brace him against the chair, right? His head is too big. He wants a body. So he's doing these experiments and the people they capture. And in the basement, as mentioned, there's a dungeon. And the dungeon has all the people that have essentially been lobotomized. There's so much here between Myron and each of the siblings that have their own shtick that you could do something with this idea beyond, because really they're ancillary. They're not the leads. They're ancillary to Lance and Loretta, the couple that's trying to screw them out of money, right? And I don't know, that to me, when I first saw this film, was a little surprising, because it's almost like if the framing story was the movie about the Princess Bride, and the in-between, the actual film, was about the grandpa trying to get his grandson to go to sleep. Right? Like, it seems a little backwards. I don't think it doesn't work, but I wondered if anybody else felt that way.
I mean, I can see where you're coming from.
I was expecting there to be like more monster in this movie.
Yeah. And like I said, I didn't mind it. I mean, I think something to mention that's really, I touched on it, but I think the effects are quite good in this movie. Myron obviously is the standout. I mean, he's the only one that really has heavy duty makeup on, but I'm curious to see what this setup looks like when Para's not in the head suit. Because I assumed that they had some sort of large applique that they then put on, and you could probably remove it. I don't know. It probably took a while. Maybe not RuPaul time, but somewhere halfway. And it works. Something else I was kind of surprised about is that, because we've talked a little about the humor in this movie, right? It's goofy. I'm not usually one for really goofy humor. Like, yes, I love Coneheads, but it's more on a thematic level, and some sight gags. This one, I really thought it was funny. I especially thought the play scene near the end, like up to the climax, was actually quite hilarious. So the setup is that Lance and Loretta have been captured. Loretta, of course, actually didn't know anything about this blackmail, really, we assume. Like, she just knew that Lance was like, we're going to have money and I'm going to show you a life you've never had before. And aren't you glad I killed your husband? Well, she gets kidnapped and Lance gets kidnapped by the Stackpools because they think, destroyed Lance's ace in the hole, which was he had the whole story about how they kidnapped people written out and sent to a lawyer who, if he disappeared, then they would, he would bring it to the media. Turns out they found out who it was, killed the guy, took the letter back. So they're all captured, but they can't kill Lance because Lance says that he had another lawyer with a letter that said, hey, if this lawyer goes missing, then you bring this to the authorities. And that goes back to Jeff. Even though the Myron is like, you're an idiot, you can't possibly compete with my intelligence. He kind of is, right? Like, we don't even know if he really does have another lawyer. I think it's skeptical. He probably doesn't have another lawyer, but it's plausible enough that Myron's like, God damn it, I have to do this. So he's like, fine, I will torture your fiance Loretta until you tell me who this other person is, which may or may not exist. And to do this, he has there's a theater in their house, and he has the lobotomized patients of his experiments performing a play of the execution of
Joan of Arc.
Joan of Arc in their house. And Joan of Arc is, of course, played by Loretta, hilariously, in my opinion. And she has a little collar that electrocutes her, that he can use a button on his chair to shock her when she doesn't read her lines. And so basically the family is sitting in the audience. Blake is there, who, by the way, he's in his boxers or naked. I think he's just in a box, but we don't really know. But he's in his boxers or whatever, being held against his will. And these people are delivering the lines very slowly on stage. And Loretta is reading these lines in the most ridiculous, goofy, Southern, ditz kind of way. And her facial expressions and the whole thing she's reading it, I was laughing. I actually thought that was a funny moment. And let's listen to this part where she's reading and getting zapped. Here we go.
I know no rightful king, save my own king of France, Charles Vi. Ow! What? I am reading it.
It's not Vi, it's VII, Roman numeral 7, Charles the 7th. Continue.
Lance, this is all your fault. Ow! Okay, Charles the 7th. And I know nothing of covens or of intercourse with Satan. I do as my God commands.
How do you like it so far?
The retard's doing a better job acting than Loretta.
Don't worry. I'm sure she'll get into the spirit of it as the drama unfolds.
Enough of thy blasphemies.
So, I mean, aside from the really inappropriate use of the word retard in this day and age, which does fit the characters though, right? Especially since he's talking to people who have severe physical deformities. Just watching Jacqueline Lovell's face as she's supposed to be responding to Lance is hilarious. Like they didn't give her a line in reply to his, they're better actors than Loretta. She just has to make this face, and I thought it worked totally. Like she really is chewing scenery in this, which is appropriate because it's ridiculous. She's like nude in a tiny little nightie, being like drug around by people that are supposed to have their brains cut out. So this was my favorite part of the movie, and I thought it was nice because I feel like there are very few moments in films where every member of the principal cast is in one scene and has a role to play. Like if you look at something where there's a huge cast like Avengers, there isn't a single scene where everyone has a valid part in that scene. I mean, you could argue that some of the stack pools are just there as window dressing, like Ernestina doesn't really do anything. And she kind of does, right? She's doing the lights or something like that, or the curtains. But it doesn't, Loretta, Lance, and Myron and Bob Schott's character, the big guy, are all doing something actively in that moment and playing parts that all work towards progressing the plot. And I think that should be applauded because it just doesn't happen in most films. You could argue that the plot is relatively simplistic in this, and that's why it's allowed it. But I think you could also argue that fine, but if you're going to do something simplistic, do it effectively. And I do think that was effective. I don't know if anybody else noticed that. That moment felt pretty complete and like one of the better, probably the best cinematic moment in the film. And I think that's why.
Yeah, I mean, I think any scene where like for me, like Lance and Myron were in the same room were like the strong points of this film. But I kind of see where you're going with this and kind of like creating like a really culminating, all the boards or all the pieces are on the board at this moment, and it's driving the action. Yeah, I can feel that.
That whole scene played it up, and I really appreciated it. It played it up almost as if suddenly Lance became the hero, and it's like, oh, is he actually going to get away with this? Because even though he is a complete scumbag asshole, there's enough charm that you're like, if he got away with it, I'd be like, yeah, that's okay. Then it turns out he really doesn't, but he got close. He got real close.
And right, what's his downfall, right? He still goes after Ernestina.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, who seduced him, we assume through Myron, which is really creepy because you're like, is Myron controlling her? That's disturbing. Seduces him before he gets abducted. And then, of course, Myron uses that against Loretta, who probably really didn't give a shit because she seems like she's pretty much roll with the punches kind of person. Like she's just waiting for the next person to off him so she can upscale her life, which more power to her. Everyone in this town is horrible.
High fidelity.
Including her.
Right, exactly. I don't know, Mandy, what's your take on that scene? In this case, you are the only woman on this panel in this very male gaze centered film.
I thought it was hilarious. We're talking about the scene where she's playing Joan of Arc, like frontal nudity. It was so funny. Oh my god, she is just great.
I really liked her. I really would love to see her. She's been in really bizarre movies after that, but I'm like, I watched this, and here's another thing about Jacqueline Lovell is she actually was she was all but signed to star in a TV show because the lead was heading out, but she actually dropped it to star in this movie. And I'm not going to say, because this I feel like is one of the more well-known full moon films of the 90s, and they made a lot of them. I'm not going to say it was a poor decision, but I think that you could make the argument that I wonder how she felt about it, turning down this regular role in a TV show as the lead, where she would not have to be nude all the time. I don't know if that affects her or not. But taking this instead, which I don't know if it really gave her the exposure, no pun intended, that she wanted going forward. And she literally chose this over that.
Oh man, I don't know if you get any more exposure from the Weird Science TV show that no one else watched either.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. But, Weird Science, I mean,
it changed the movie that everyone knew.
But, exactly. At least you would say Weird Science, like, oh, the movie, and it's like, no, the TV shows. Oh, I didn't know they did a TV show. Whereas now you'd say, oh, I was in Head of the Family, and you're like, wasn't that a sitcom in the 80s? And I'm like, no, No. It's a Full Moon Video that you can stream off their website and sometimes find a used copy of at a Citgo gas station. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a different beast. But I really think she deserves better. And like I said, she's still acting. She was in some movies a couple of years ago, so I haven't seen anything recently. But there's a TV series called Forest Bathing, Friends with Benefits. I'm going to assume that is a sexy show. I'm not going to assume that is a regular film. She did also
watch it for us, Nate, and report back.
She also, well, she was in a lot of Full Moon films as well after this. So she did actually, to be fair, she actually did have a good career with Full Moon post this film. She was in Lolita 2000, Femalian. I think she's in a sort of soft reboot called Femalians of that one as well. Just for Full Moon fanatics, it's well known. So she had a career with this. I'm not saying she didn't make, a decent job, but I think that it is hard to. I want her to do well because I think she did a good job in this movie, and it's always one of those questions where, like, I want to ask her, do you regret that or why? Like, what's the deal? And I hope you didn't regret it because I really enjoyed this film.
She missed her chance because it was only a few years after. She could have been Rogue.
She would have been great as Rogue.
I think she would have been fantastic.
I mean, I don't mind Anna Paquin, but I think that especially if it was a more comic oriented and not as much of a modern take, she would have been an absolute perfect one. The other, so we didn't really talk about the ending of this film, right? So they light the pyre on stage because Lance is like, no, I'm not going to tell you. It's my only bargaining chip. I'm like, all right, well, she's going to get burned. So they light the fire. And then Bob Schott's character, Otis, the big guy, is like, pretty girl, no burn kind of thing. And he breaks from Myron's control and runs up and rescues her, right? He takes her off stage and runs to the dungeon basement where he flips the switch. I don't know if that's supposed to turn off the sprinkler, the fire alarm. I don't know what it does, but it causes the entire house to go up and burn. And we assume everyone dies, but we don't really know. And Otis and Loretta are outside, and Otis is like, pretty girl. And she's like, yeah, thanks, buddy. And he's like, pretty girl. And then she gets the idea, and we literally see her getting the idea because that's how they've developed this character. That you're the last Stackpole heir and they have all this money. And so then it shoots forward and they're getting married by some justice of the peace or lawyer or something in a room. And she's like, see, aren't you happy? And then she's laughing and he's like, laugh, it's fun. This is good. And he's laughing and his laughs get louder and louder until she's like, what the heck? And it starts to sound like J.W. Para's character, Myron's laugh. And I don't know if anybody else caught that. So it's clearly supposed to be this, like I said before, Tales from the Cryptian twist where, Myron did get his body. He's now in the body of Otis, and he's married to Loretta, who also had a really gross seduction scene where she's trying to seduce Myron as the head in the chair. And I don't know about anybody else. We know he's not really this disturbing looking head in a chair. We know this. But it's still gross because they did a good job. He's got liver spots all over. You can see veins through his pallid scalp. He's kind of drooling out of the corner of his mouth just a little bit all the time. And she's trying to seduce him. And then they give him, he of course he knows what she's doing and he's messing with her as it turns out. But he puts his tongue out and they do this thing where they have a like fake 1.5 foot long tongue that goes and cups her breast, which is just nauseating. And I give her props for that because I don't know, I can't imagine if I'm watching it on screen and I'm like, gross, which is of course supposed to be the effect. I can't imagine actually being in the room while that's happening. Like, I don't know if anybody else was like, gross.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That was my wife. My wife's like, oh my God, why are you
Nate made me do it.
Yes. And it just gave me those memories of searching the internet and finding, insane like Japanese videos of like live action hentai where it's like, they actually had a poor woman having sex with a giant rubber octopus. Like, really? And you know what? Fast forward to episode Cult and Classic podcast 112. I'm sure we'll review it.
Yeah.
So
Can't wait.
So anyway, at the end, we get that sort of come around. Like, everyone's terrible, but Loretta doesn't get off scot-free. You know what I mean? Like, she's just married the head, although now he's like a 7-foot-tall strong man who is also presumably smart. We don't really know. He could be limited in that. We also don't know if he's the only one that's alive for real or what. It doesn't matter. But I would love to see a sequel. Sort of the like Teen Nick plus Drake and Josh version of True Blood, you know, like it would just, I would totally watch that. I'd buy the season. Yeah. So I think we've about got there between these two films, which are clearly so closely related, because in the end, in life, it's all about family. Jeff, who would you recommend Head of the Family to, and why?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who's in for kind of a silly good time, like I love the contrast between these two films. The first one has no music in it. The second one, literally the first note is like kind of classical music with like some fart sounds kind of slid in, so like you know exactly what the film is about. Yeah, I mean, it's a good time. I mean, I just wish that they had given me somebody to root for. If you have, you know, a battle between two characters, it's more fun if you can root for somebody. But yeah,
you're such a Pollyanna. Just kidding.
Right.
I'm just kidding.
Next, I'm done.
Mandy, who would you recommend this film to, and why?
Oh man, if you wish there was more Munster movies, then you should watch this.
It's true.
Watched all 3 Addams Families and then all of the Munsters.
And this.
I gotta have more.
It's like,
yeah, you're like, I should stop, but I'm just gonna have that one more movie.
You know, yeah. Tad, what about you?
So, if you are a fan of 90s movies that feel like 80s movies, this is a great movie.
Yes.
And also, if you need even more titties in your sort of comedy horror movies than there usually is, then this is also a great film. And if you want to hear some banging Carolina accents.
Okay, and here's the other thing too. I want to mention,
literally banging while they're doing the accents.
My wife always mentions this, and it's totally true. I mean, yes, Ernestina is played by Alexandria Quinn, who's an adult actress, and her breasts are fake. But shout out to films that have people's real body. And Jacqueline Lovell is, you know, she's natural. She doesn't have implants, as far as like very, very much so. And that's always nice, I think, to see in these movies, because so often we do get the people who, as Maria Bamford said, you know, my neighbor got breast implants, but she's in porn, so it's for work, it's deductible. You know what I mean? We get that sort of like, this is your profession, and I know just by looking at you, that's not a read. It's just, if I saw a guy talking stocks in a business suit walking around, you know, Times Square, I would assume he was a stockbroker, right? That's what we see. We don't see that in this film, so kudos to that. That leaves it to me. Who would I recommend this film to? To echo everyone else, I would recommend this film to anyone who loves the Addams Family and wants to know what would have happened if Skinemax bought it and did a soft reboot at 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday. That's what this movie is, plain and simple, and it was a great time. I would love to see that sequel. And just as a note, follow Full Moon Video. They did kickstart a whole bunch of films last year, including a new Subspecies movie by Ted Nicolau, who did Bad Channels. If you enjoyed that on our podcast, check it out. So yeah, that's it for this episode of Cult and Classic Podcast. As always, our clips are used for review purposes only, and the rights are retained by the film owners. And if you would like to hear any of our music, it is by The Chud. You can visit them at facebook.com/thechudband. Keep an eye out for our upcoming Patreon and follow us at cultandclassicpodcast.com and subscribe wherever podcasts are found. And please, if you enjoy our podcast, leave a review at iTunes, Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere there are podcasts, there are reviews, and leave reviews. My name is Nate Wyckoff. Have a great day. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit cultandclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.